Welcome to Before Dieting. This is a podcast that grew out of the Waiting for Happiness project. I'm your host, Bronwyn Fletcher. I created this series to take one clear message to a wider audience, that if you're caught in a repeating weight pattern, there's far more going on than simply overeating. On the podcast, you'll hear the case for going deeper into your own history, because that's where you will find the reasons behind your eating patterns. And once you know those reasons, everything starts to make sense. There is a condition for listening, though. You must set aside blame and shame. These two stop your curiosity and keep you stuck on that dieting hamster wheel. But without them blocking your view, you will start to see the links between your life experiences, your beliefs, and your food choices. While every woman's story is different, on the weekly bite-sized episodes, you'll find new concepts, radical reframes, and women's stories to help start your own exploration. We'll go beyond the surface conversation about weight and dig into the real forces behind it. We'll go into why quick fixes and one-size-fits-all plans can only work temporarily, and how lasting change begins with uncovering your own food story. If you're ready to stop placing hope in another diet and start uncovering what's really going on, you're in the right place. Listen in. When I started to think about breaking eating up into all of these different types, what prompted me to do that was after so many conversations with women where they would tell me that they really only thought about eating in two ways. They would be talking about regular eating and they'd be talking about dieting. Based on a few more questions, they could say, well, yes, they could register that they ate sometimes for comfort, and some would even say that I eat emotionally. But these terms are so generic and they weren't really useful in terms of helping women really understanding their eating. So when I went back to all the conversations I'd had with women, I really started to see that a number of them were using descriptions that started to form into categories. When I started putting all of the different types together, and they kind of all do fit together, but as you'll hear when I give you the descriptions, there's differences, clearly, and there's a big degree of overlap. So let me run through the brief definitions of the types of eating for starters, and then I'll come back to each. So the first type is functional. And functional eating is that everyday eating that you have to do just to fuel your body and be able to keep going. That sets up for the rest of the eating that sits around this type. So when we're talking about functional eating, we're usually talking about the 3 meals a day stuff. We're talking about whether you get enough nutrition. But when we're talking about women who are fighting a battle with their weight, the big problem with functional eating is that they can often have serving sizes that are too large. That can be one of the ways that they can get additional calories in from their everyday functional eating. Now, a subset, if you like, of functional eating is what I call secondary eating. And secondary eating is the eating that you do outside your regular meals, and it includes snacks and treats that you consciously choose. But there are so many other ways that you can actually take in calories with secondary eating. So, for example, a number of women who had toddlers at the time would tell me that when their child did not finish what was on the plate, they would in fact eat the leftovers. Now, I'm pretty sure that's not stuff that actually makes it into the food app or your food diary if you're really looking to track your calories. But I'll come back and talk a little bit more about secondary further on in the podcast, because there are some other things that you may never have thought about, and secondary eating is one of those types of eating that really flies under the radar. The third type of eating is dieting, and that's the one that most women are familiar with, whether they are restricting their calorie intake through eating only from between 10 and 6 in the day, or whether they are, following a particular diet that's been put out by somebody that, has rules and whatever that says eat this but don't eat that and so on. But the one that sort of pairs up with dieting is called constrained eating, and that's where you're restricting your food or you're being vigilant about what you're eating when you're not dieting. So that can actually bring in a whole range of rules and restrictions that don't necessarily, again, get registered as dieting, but they have the impact of still, it's like the diet you have when you're not having the diet. The next one is social eating, and that's where, as the name implies, it's where you're looking to probably have more to do with the company or the experience than it is to what you're eating. But there are also, again, lots of rules around social eating, many of them for individually based for a particular woman as to how she's going to handle those social situations. And that, in turn, can bring its own set of problems. The next type is comfort eating. And that's emotionally driven eating, where you're eating something that you really is one of your favourites to feel better. And even diets acknowledge that comfort eating is an important part of just eating in general. And that's where they will give you those allowance of the 2 bitter, dark chocolate pieces that mostly doesn't do it for any woman. The next one is relief eating. And again, talking to women about relief eating, often the word binge comes up. But these days, I don't think it's a useful word because binging can extend to Netflix, it can extend to shopping, and you name it, it can just be used. So it's not a useful term when it comes to helping you figure out what is the way that you eat, what is your system for eating. And so the word I think that is more important and more useful is relief eating, because it brings a whole range of descriptions with it that are almost based around semi-automatic eating, but the whole point of that type of eating is for women to get relief. They don't say, I'm eating to binge, they say, I'm eating to get relief. And of course, the last one, type 8, is conscious eating. And that's what all of our programs, the Waiting for Happiness project, is all based around, is how can we help women get to a point where they are eating consciously. And I'm not talking about choosing the good food or the bad food. Many women that actually are involved in the Waiting for Happiness project had very little access or agency to food as children, and therefore we want to be able to help them restore that agency. And conscious choice of food is going to be how that comes out. We're not talking about whether they choose the better option or the worse option or the junk food or the healthy salad. This is actually about being conscious in your choices, and that's been missing for a lot of women with a repeating weight pattern. So let me leave you with a couple of questions to think about your own 8 types of eating. How easy is it for you to leave food on the plate? Are you a regular sampler when preparing and cooking food? And what about your favourite comfort food? What do you like to eat? And have you ever experienced autopilot eating? Thanks for listening in. In future episodes, I'm going to go into these 8 types in much more detail. And between now and then, if this has struck a chord with you, head over to the Waiting for Happiness website, where I've developed a cheat sheet on the 8 types for you to download. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.